over to me. So welcome everyone to good afternoon, and welcome to this Ed talk about Harry Potter and the hero's journey. So let me start by seeing if this hero's journey sounds familiar to all of you. Imagine yourself living in the ordinary world. Maybe you're an employee somewhere and you're frustrated by the way that things are working there. You feel like you're not giving everything that you've got to give while you're at work, and you feel like there's more. And so you get this idea that maybe you want to become self-employed, or maybe you know someone who's self-employed and they're having a really great time and can't stop raving about it. And you think, do you know what? That might be something for me. But then you get that little voice in your head that says, oh, I'm not sure that I can do that. I'm not really sure that I've got what it takes to be self-employed. So in the hero's journey talk, we refer to that as refusing the call to the adventure. But you get over that and somehow you decide to do it anyway. And then you start to meet the mentors that are going to guide you through that journey. And you get some friends, and you might also decide that there are some people along the way that you want to avoid as well. And throughout that journey, you're facing your fears, those thoughts in your head that say, you know, oh, am I actually good enough for this? The fears of being seen, being really visible and taking risks, and really questioning yourself and asking, who am I to do this? So all of these things come up, but if we can overcome those fears, then we start to really develop as a business person, as an entrepreneur, and we begin to enjoy the rewards of taking that risk and moving out of employment and into self-employment. And also along that way, we have the many deaths of failure. So death, not necessarily a literal death, but a metaphorical death, is a feature that repeats itself over and over again in the hero's journey. And so we make mistakes, we get things wrong, we lose clients, we do unprofessional things, we do all of this stuff. And every time we overcome those failures, we learn from them, we develop from them, we grow from them. We return from reflecting on those things much stronger, much wiser, and therefore much more fully able to give our gifts to the world, which is why we decided to become self-employed anyway. So does any of that resonate with people on the call? Just put your hands up. Yeah, fantastic. Lovely. I thought that would be the case. So you'll probably recognize a lot of those steps that I referred to. And it's important to pay attention to the fact that although there are lots of sort of outward steps that you're taking, in order to take those steps, you're taking lots of internal steps. There's an internal journey that's taking place where you're growing, you're transforming. And it's that growth, that internal growth, that transformation that is what the hero's journey is all about. And it's the thing that really, really excited me about all of these stories that I started to hear about when I was very, very young, from fairy tales that we hear about, so like the Grimm's fairy tales, and the sorts of fireside stories that you might have heard people tell or read about from sort of like the Aborigine cultures and the American Indians, and lots of African tribes tell all these stories as well. So this hero's journey thing is a universal theme in human experience. There's the self-employed journey, but there are lots of other journeys as well, which is why it appears so often in human literature, and it's appeared across time, across the world, in every culture that has ever been and will ever be. And the first kind of historical example of that is a story called the epic poem of Gilgamesh, which was a Mesopotamian story The first one that we know of that was ever written down, it was carved in stone in apparently the cuneiform script. And that poem is dated back to over 4,000 years ago. So this has been something that has been in human history for a great many years. And there are also lots of other versions to the hero's journey that you'll probably be familiar with in the Bible. So, for example, we've probably all heard of Jonah and the whale, where God had a task for Jonah to perform. And basically, Jonah bottled it. He ran away and tried to hide from this thing that God said that Jonah had to do. And somehow he ended up in the belly of a whale. But inside the belly of the whale, he went through this spiritual transformation that then meant that he had what it took to do this task that God had for him. And so the whale put him back on the land, and he fulfilled this task that he had to do. And you might be familiar with the story of Moses, the little boy that was found in the bulrushes, who became a prince to the Pharaoh. He lived in Egypt, but then ran away from Egypt because he killed one of the foremen on the building site to the pyramids. He discovered his Jewish heritage. He went back to Egypt and freed the Jews from slavery, and then led the Jewish people back to the promised land. And the other one that you're probably going to be really familiar with is the story of Jesus, but I probably don't need to tell you that one. Lots of other religious leaders as well, Buddha, Muhammad, even in the Hindu culture, they have the story that's known as the Bhagavad Gita, which is the hero's journey of Prince Arjuna as he fights against his brother and is guided towards his spiritual strength by one of the Hindu gods called Krishna. So you can kind of begin to see that there's lots of religious examples, and there are lots of other sort of more traditional ones as well, as I say, from this sort of fairy tale culture that we've come to know of in Europe. But in the modern versions, we've got lots of ones that appear in books and movies, so things like Lord of the Rings, Star Wars. If you're like the Marvel character fan, lots of comics have all of that hero's journey stuff in, from Spider-Man to Superman to Wonder Woman. They're all that kind of thing. And for those of you who've got kids that like watching the Disney movies, every single Disney movie that's ever been made has basically been the hero's journey. And they're designed to entertain, they're designed to educate, but they're also designed to inspire us to live that life where we can give our gifts to the world, rather than live small, play small, and just be this little cog in a really, really large machine. So I grew up on Star Wars and Karate Kid. I'm sure lots of you guys did too. And I credit a lot of my love for martial arts and personal development on Star Wars, on the Force, to be a Jedi, to fight against the Sith. And again, from the Karate Kid days, the whole wax on, wax off thing that everyone seems to remember from those movies as well. And my son grew up on Harry Potter. And I loved reading the stories to him, watching the films, listening to Stephen Fry read the books. You can get them on audiobook. They're really fantastic. Sharing with him Harry's journey through his time at school, and noticing how that journey really reflected our own lives. So what I'm going to give you now for the remaining few minutes that we've got is Harry Potter and the Hero's Journey, specifically focused on the first book that J.K. Rowling wrote about Harry Potter, which is The Philosopher's Stone. And depending on which model of the hero's journey you're looking at, there can be anywhere between 6 and 22 stages. That's what I found when I was researching this a little bit. And so I'm going to plumb for somewhere in the middle with 12 stages to help explain how the hero's journey shows up in Harry Potter. Are most of you familiar with Harry Potter? You've got just like, yeah, I thought, yeah, it's a great story. So the book starts with Harry in what is always referred to as the ordinary world, which in the books is Privet Drive, where Harry is hidden, not just from the wizarding world by living with his aunt and uncle, but he's also hidden from the ordinary world as well, because he lives in the cupboard under the stairs. They so want him out of the way that they want him hidden and not to cause any problems, not to rock the boat. And Harry is called to adventure by a series of letters that get sent to him by Owl from the Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. And the call to go into the wizarding world is not refused by Harry at first, but actually by his uncle, Vernon, who is just adamant that Harry is not a wizard and that there's no such thing as magic or any of those things. And he makes it really clear that there is no way that Harry's going to this school. And then a little bit later on in the book, someone is sent to collect Harry and take him to Hogwarts. And when this person says to Harry that he's a wizard, and I love this line, it always sends shivers up and down my spine, Harry just says, I'm not a wizard, I'm just Harry. And this guy that comes to collect him, Hagrid, says to him, well, actually you are. And he explains about his parents and about all these things that Harry can do that he could never expected that he could do. And Hagrid becomes his first guide in the wizarding world. And Harry, so the next stage in the hero's journey is what they refer to as crossing the threshold, where you cross from your ordinary life into this other world. And Harry crosses that threshold a couple of times, once with Hagrid when he goes into Diagon Alley. And then the second time he does that with the Weasleys on platform 9 3/4, where he moves across from King's Cross onto platform 9 3/4 to take the Hogwarts Express. And it's on that train that he meets his first friends, Ron Weasley and Hermione Granger, where he begins to start to feel at home in that world. And then when they arrive at the school and they're waiting at the stairs to go into the Great Hall, he meets Draco Malfoy and his sidekicks, Crabbe and Goyle. And these are his enemies, or some of his enemies, that he meets throughout the stories, which we all have to face when we go on our hero's journey. Now, the 7th stage is what they refer to as the approach to the innermost cave. There's a wonderful scene in Star Wars where Yoda has Luke Skywalker walk into a cave. And Luke Skywalker asks him, so what's in here to be afraid of? And Yoda says to Luke, only what you take in with you. And Harry's version of this is when he is faced with a magical object that is called the Mirror of Erised. And this mirror shows Harry his deepest desires. And Harry's deepest desire is for him to have known his parents. And when he looks in the mirror, he sees himself with his parents. And for quite some time, this completely knocks Harry off his hero's journey. And he spends hours just staring into this mirror, wishing and hoping that he could be with his parents, which of course he never can, because they were killed when he was very young by Voldemort, who was the darkest wizard of all time. And so Professor Dumbledore, Harry's greatest guide in the wizarding world, explains to Harry that he really needs to let go of this fantasy and begin to put his energies and his focus on living in reality. And so he hides the mirror from Harry, and Harry is set free to go on the next part of his journey, which is the ordeal. And Harry must fight Voldemort in the first book in the form of one of his professors, Professor Quirrell. And in every book, Harry has a deadly fight with Voldemort in some form. Every book has one or more scenes where Harry has to do that, where his life is in peril. And although we don't necessarily put our lives in peril, what we are doing very often in our own hero's journey is taking massive risks, which feels incredibly threatening, feels like we're putting everything at risk, we're putting everything on the line. But there are rewards that we get every time we face these ordeals. And when Harry faces his ordeals and survives, Dumbledore spends some time explaining to Harry what this ordeal means to him in his relationship to Voldemort. And with every ordeal, Harry is made to understand Voldemort more deeply so that he can ultimately defeat Voldemort at the very end of the series of books. And after each of these ordeals, Harry returns to life at school, to his friends, to safety. And in fact, he has to take the road back to Privet Drive, back to his aunt and uncle, which is his ultimate magical protection from Lord Voldemort that gets explained much later on in the books. Now, the path to destroying Lord Voldemort, and Lord Voldemort is this kind of symbol that represents this thing that we have in all of us, this part of us that holds us back and from really living our life fully. That path to destroying Voldemort is a long one that involves Harry facing death many, many times and ultimately dying to himself, dying to his own fear, dying to his own sense of how he's limited. And in doing so, he gets to this place where he can embrace freedom, which means that he can really embrace his goal, really embrace his life purpose, and do so with a sense of fulfillment and real sense of, I'm just going to go for this in a way that is incredibly powerful and empowering. And so this enables Harry to, and this is the final stage, return with the elixir, is what they call it. In other words, to give their gift fully without fear to the world, which is what Harry does at the end of the books. And the only way that we can really do that fully is to be able to give that gift in freedom. So the hero's journey is not a straightforward one. Each book is a hero's journey in its own right, woven into a much, much larger arc that is Harry's hero's journey toward freedom and giving his gifts to the world. And in that, Dumbledore talks about the power of love over the power of fear, the power of friendship over the power of just looking after yourself and being your own person. There are some really profound themes I find in the Harry Potter books, and all of that, as far as I'm concerned, really powerfully links to the hero's journey. So I said at the start, the hero's journey has endured for thousands of years because it speaks to us about our humanity, about our fears and our hopes and our dreams. And Harry had a really specific and special job to do that only he could do. And the hero's journey pointed him towards discovering the uniqueness that he possessed inside him that allowed him to give his unique contribution. And that is the power of the hero's journey for all of us, to discover our uniqueness so that we can contribute that uniqueness to the world. So what I'd like to leave you with as we come to the very end of this, I'd like to leave you with a question. And that question is, what parallels can you see in your life and the hero's journey of Harry Potter? Thank you.